Welcome to the Moss Report with your host, Dr. Ralph W. Moss.
Hi, this is Ralph Moss, and welcome to this week's podcast of the Moss Reports. A very special guest today. I'm a little nervous because I don't know how to pronounce her first name. I'll call her Dr.
Myfanwy.
Myfanwy. It sounds like it's Welsh. Am I right?
Yes.
Beautiful
yes.
name, Myfanwy.
Thank
Okay,
you.
But since you have a doctorate, I will call you Dr. Webb. And I came across your paper. One of my consultation clients called it to my attention. And I'm ashamed to say that I'm an editor of Integrative Cancer Therapies, the journal, and have been since its founding, I'm pretty sure. But it kind of got past me, this article. And when I read this article, I thought, this is fantastic. I mean, what you've done, first of all, it confirms something that I have long believed. And so we're obviously on the exact same wavelength on this point, but also the work that you did to put into for this paper. I mean, it only could have come from somebody who was incredibly skilled at research and also clearly very motivated to find the answers. So I'll just say very briefly that this has to do with the topic of cancer stem cells, which is a tremendously well-known topic within the field of cancer research, and yet very few patients, from my experience, have heard about this or know what this is, much less are applying it to their treatment strategy. And I'm doing a quick search here because I know the answer in advance that um, cancer stem cells come up with almost 10,000 references within PubMed. It's 9,000, if you put them in quotes, 9,277 results. And yet you'd be very hard pressed to ever meet a patient whose oncologist told them, here's this fantastic research topic and here's something you could do about it that would almost certainly impact your cancer. So I think, you and your co-author Craig Cookard have just paved have paved the way for millions of patients. I think if word of this can get out, so that's why we wanted to have you on our program.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So I guess I'll start by asking you, how does the concept operate? In other words, what's the basic mechanism here?
Well, my colleague and I, Dr. Craig Cookard, co-wrote a paper recently that proposes this potential new paradigm, as you outlined, for treating cancer. And we use triple-negative breast cancer to represent the tumour type as an example of how to carry out this new strategy. And just briefly how this concept operates is what we currently have for cancer treatment is chemotherapy drugs that kill fast-growing cells in the body, which include both the cancer cells and the non-cancer cells. And then there's immunotherapies that ramp up the body's immune system to facilitate its own attack on the cancer cells. And there's also ongoing chemotherapies, such as those aimed at blocking the hormone receptors to prevent recurrence. And of course, there's surgery and radiotherapy as well. But our treatment design is rather different to all of these. And instead of using pharmaceutical drugs, it uses natural compounds. So the cancer cells can use many different ways to hijack our cellular environment and grow. They use our various biochemical or metabolic pathways that there are a series of chemical reactions that make products for other reactions in order to maintain our homeostasis. And each cancer type has specific pathways that they exploit. So they will try one avenue, and if that fails, they'll try another one and another until they find the right environment to grow. So for instance, the breast cancer, triple-negative breast cancer, uses around 10 main pathways that we know about. And what our strategy proposes is to manipulate all of these biochemical pathways all at once. So it thwarts all these avenues simultaneously. And the manipulation is aimed at suppressing the pathways, but not blocking them, not completely blocking them, because blocking them completely may jeopardize fundamental cellular processes. So overall, this suppression-centric aim targets the mechanisms of growth with the goal of potentially halting tumour growth and preventing cancer cell metabolic adaptation.
It's interesting, meaning that you don't want to be too effective with this because there's some overlap with normal growth processes, right? I mean, so you're trying to sort of constrict the access of the tumor to these avenues of growth, but allow the normal
Yes.
cells through. And it's got, you could think
Yeah.
of this as like a city under siege that, you know, you want to block, you want to make entry into the city center more difficult for the rioters, let's say. We've had some examples of this in recent days. You may have heard about it. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
you don't want to keep the normal function, you know, the normal people from being able to get through. Am I reading this correctly?
Yeah, that's true. Yes. Yeah.
And but from a practical point of view, you're constricting. You're constricting the access of the tumor to these growth pathways, and most people, I think, they don't understand that. First of all, just say a word or two about what cancer stem cells are, because I'm afraid we're going to lose a lot of people. Because, as I say, even though there's tens, more, you know, whatever it was, 10,000, almost 20,000 journal articles about this, it's not a concept that most people hear about or have learned about. So, what do we mean by a cancer stem cell?
Well, I'm well, I'm not a biochemist, and I have done first year biochemistry, but cells originate in a way that they can form any kind of cell, and so they're quite they can adapt and change from when they're at that early level. So they can differentiate.
Mm-hmm. So the cancer stem cells are like normal stem cells in that they can give rise to just the very plastic. They can give rise to almost any other tissue, and the cancer stem cell can create all the other types of cancer cells that are in the tumor. And they have these other qualities, right? That they are highly resistant to treatment, and they self perpetuate. They perpetuate themselves, and they also, a lot of scientists believe that they're responsible for metastasis, for the spreading of the cancer and the recurrence of the disease. So, from a scientist's point of view, nothing is more important. There's no population within the tumor that's more important than the cancer stem cells. Would you say that's a fair summation?
Oh, yes, but the thing I'm interested in is how they manipulate how they hijack the pathways, the cyclical pathways that our metabolic environment uses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I sort of see all this from the bigger picture. Like with the biochemical pathways is sort of like lots of cogs that all connect. There's these wheels that they cycle round, and the cancer cells can get onto these cogs and then use them to their advantage and grow.
Mm-hmm.
So my my passion is interfering with that, interfering with these cancers, with the biochemical pathways, with the cyclical series of interactions at the metabolic level.
Yes, And,
at the cellular level.
and
Yeah.
how did you come up with this concept of sort of the suppression, what you call suppression-centric strategy?
Yes. Well, it was a little bit out of desperation, really. In 2018, when I was 46, I'm now 49, I was diagnosed with an aggressive type of breast cancer known as triple negative breast cancer. So this was in one of my breasts and my lymph nodes, and I had a double mastectomy, chemotherapy and radiotherapy, all done in 1 year, luckily. So with a background in research, I unsurprisingly looked to scientific papers to find out the nitty-gritty about odds of survival, etc.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, though, the chemotherapy drugs were a bit of a problem. I discovered that the chemotherapy works for only around 10% of patients with triple negative breast cancer. So this was back then, in 2018. So I thought surgery first due to the fast mitotic rate of the tumour that I had, then chemotherapy rather than neoadjunctive first, just in case the chemotherapy didn't work. So then, while I was doing the chemo, besides the generally sort of hard going of it all, I noticed my cognition slipping down, and this happened dramatically each time I had a doxorubicin hit, which is pretty harsh chemotherapy drug known as the Red Devil. Near the end,
Adriamycin too.
yeah,
Otherwise,
yeah,
yeah.
oh, yeah. So near the end, coming up to the last infusion of that, I nearly refused the whole lot, the rest of it, because I really didn't want to live with a zombie mind. But I did find something that helped with the cognition, but that's another story. But at each stage of the treatment, I would go and read up about the following stages, and I had to do this sort of as I went because of lack of energy. But knowing the efficacy of the chemo and knowing that once my treatment was complete, for my tumour type, there was no ongoing treatment. So that's when I started to feel pretty desperate. So I'm someone, my personality is that I have backup plans for everything. So I started looking for something else that could increase my odds. So the upcoming radiotherapy I knew would increase my odds of survival quite a lot, but something ongoing after that I thought would be really good. And so my aim there was to create my own ongoing anti-cancer treatment.
Yeah.
And something that was going to be effective and based on science, and not something that's kind of the airy-fairy kind of flaky stuff. So I started learning to understand how the triple negative breast cancer tumor type thrives, and then I searched for something to block it or suppress it. And my main tumor, I found, didn't have receptors for estrogen or progesterone or the human epidermal growth factor, which is the usual receptors for breast cancer. But it does have the androgen receptor. So I started focusing on that. There's no treatment for the androgen receptor at the moment for breast cancer. And I became quite frustrated, though, and a little angry that there was all these anti-androgen drugs out there for prostate, but I couldn't get them as only the prostate cancer patients could access them. But then I discovered a prostate trial targeting androgen using isoflavin-rich soy protein isolate with active agents of about 50% genistein and 30% daidzein to be effective in reducing those androgen levels. This trial found that about 58 men in the trial that either had high risk of developing prostate cancer were assigned randomly to 3 groups of soy diet, and this didn't either alter the estrogen levels, which is good. So I thought, well, this is good. This is something I can get my hands on. So I hunted down a supplement online with amazingly good proportion of the genistein and daidzein. So I started taking that, and I did go off it for the radiotherapy because I also found with the research that it can be a radiosensitizer. So I didn't want that to jeopardize my body with the radiotherapy. So I wanted to know, though, if this was actually lowering my androgen levels but without a serum test. All I could do for this, for like a biomarker, was to extrapolate looking at my facial hair changes. So what high androgen levels can do is increase the coarse hair growth. So I look out for any changes in the occasional kind of coarse whiskers that I get on my chin. I wax these deliberately just to see any kind of growth changes. And I remember my mum saying she had estrogen receptor positive breast cancer.
Wow.
And she complains about her ongoing chemo maintenance pharmaceutical drug that she has, and she complains because it gives her the coarse hair to grow on her face. Mm-hmm. And I've always had this coarse hair, so not in a huge way, but I've always had that. And so this suggests to me that when she said that, I realised that our circulating levels of androgen differ naturally, and if we, like, it's a deep-seated circulating level, and if we had been able to correct this then early on, then before our breast cancers actually formed tumours, like came about as a disease, then if we could have corrected these imbalances, then maybe we would never have got the breast cancers.
It's fascinating.
So
that's
fascinating. So that was the kind of an inkling about the whole system, looking at the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
So in trying to understand how the whole cancer thing operates, I didn't know anything about cancer really until my diagnosis. Even though my parents both had cancer before me diagnoses, I really hadn't looked into it. I started learning about all the known biochemical pathways that this triple negative breast cancer uses, and then that's when I looked for natural compounds that I could access that suppress these. So I kind of went the next step. After the receptor, I went to the mechanisms, and because for me, I have to understand how things actually operate. And so after I started doing this level of research, I was looking at all those preclinical trials out there, and in doing this, I was both happy and also pretty dismayed at the many studies that are out there, because very few of these natural medicinal compounds seem to be tested at human trial levels, but there's thousands of preclinical, in vivo, in vitro studies that have been done. And I know firsthand the effort involved to do these studies, because I did my honours in medical research doing in vivo trials with large animals and small animals. So I was always dismayed. I'd scan the papers and I'd read the last line at the end of the conclusion, mm-hmm. and they would always say, has promise as an anti-cancer agent.
Yeah.
And then I looked to see for further work, and never was there any done.
Right.
So I thought, well, this is such a waste. All this data out there ready to be used.
Yeah.
Yes. So these, yeah.
I just want to interject for a second. PubMed is my second brain, and as we're talking, I did a little search, natural products in quotes and cancer, and you come up with 8,122 results. Now, mm-hmm. you restrict that to clinical trials. Out of 8,000, you get 17 results. Now, out of 8,000, now let's restrict it to randomized controlled trials, which is of course the gold standard for testing, 7 results. So out of the 8,000,
Mm.
not one in 1,000 papers on natural products and cancer results in a randomized controlled trial. And these are just, these could be 5
Exactly.
of these could be about the same study, but I'm just doing, these are
Yes.
rough numbers.
Well,
Less than
and
1,000,
these,
less than one in a
yes, and
thousand.
yet these compounds show death of cancer cells in
Absolutely.
vitro and in vivo,
Absolutely.
which
And a consistent pattern.
it's definitive. Yes, yes,
I mean, it would be one thing
yeah,
if you have a sort of a stray finding that some, you know, plum sauce or something kills cancer cells, but we're talking about detailed knowledge of
hmm,
of the effect of natural agents on the various pathways that the cancer uses, that all the things, that molecule, the way you can test this is you just put in a term and then you pick one of these markers for the cancer stem cells, like a hedgehog or WNT or
hmm,
some of the other major factors, and you see invariably these have been studied all over the world. I mean, this is an
yes,
open. I hate to go all conspiratorial on you, but this is a kind of an open secret, right? I mean, it's no secret
yes,
to the research community, and
mm,
yet we're faced with this complete disconnect between
mm,
what the research shows and then the practical application. So I thought your story is so amazing because here you are, both a researcher and a patient, and somebody who, in effect, stumbled on the relationship between these food elements, these nutraceuticals, and your cancer, and then took it the
yes,
next step to actually using yourself as the guinea pig to treat
hmm,
the cancer with. And so what has been the result of doing
yeah.
this?
So so after I realised, so I looked at the I looked for the mechanisms, the natural compounds, and then I looked for biomarkers, which there's not many out there. But as I was doing all this, I was discussing these ideas with my oncologist, Dr. Cookard, and he was pretty interested and supportive. And initially, this whole thing was just for me, but then I realised that there's all sorts of people in situations where they couldn't get hold of pharmaceutical drugs or surgery, and they couldn't access this sort of. They may not be able to access ongoing chemotherapy maintenance.
Mhm,
So I thought, well, maybe this could work for them. And I was also thinking of Indigenous people living in remote
mhm,
communities with less access to treatments. And then the second thing I realised was that what I did for my cancer, other people could potentially do this for the different cancer types. So it could work on any tumour, and that's when I first thought, well, it should really be published. And so um, there was actually there was a third selfish reason as well, and that was that I had all these ideas, and I really wanted to put them through rigorous formal testing, um, so of a scientific publication to know if I'm on the right track. And I'm not an oncologist, not a medical doctor, and I thought that this formal formal peer, if it's peer reviewed, this would give me a yes or no as to whether I have a chance of using this, stopping my cancer from returning. Besides the fact that I've been using it and I still don't have any triple negative breast cancer, and I'm pretty much got to the point where the acute recurrence stage is over. So that's a good thing
I'll
too.
say.
But n equals one. N equals one.
Oh well,
um,
it does.
yeah. So yeah. Yeah. So I went. I thought, well, this is worth publishing, and I asked Dr. Cookard if he would like to work on publishing it, and using my cancer type as a representative tumor type, and he said yes. So his input as an oncologist and his confidence with my ideas has been really invaluable to this actually getting out there.
Hmm.
And so what I didn't realize in the initial stages was the full scope of how this suppression-centric pathway, like can be potentially used in the future. And so for the least potential, it can potentially provide an ongoing anti-cancer maintenance treatment array, if you like, for those people that there's no ongoing treatment. But then another potential use, as we kind of sort of touched on, is anti-cancer therapy that's non-pharmaceutical without the harsh side effects. And then there's a third, which would be amazing if our system actually works and our strategy actually is effective. And this is the prevention of cancer. So you would be manipulating pathways of highly probable cancers that you might get in the future. You would actually monitor these pathways, and if they get out of sync, you would manipulate them so they don't get out of sync in a way that the cancers can hijack them. So that's the potential.
Is that practical? I mean,
well, we've yet to test proof of concept, but there is that scope. So if you can put permanent roadblocks on all the specific pathways, if you look at one tumor type, if you can tweak them all, stop those, suppress all those roadways that the cancers cycle around on, then the cancer shouldn't grow. So if you can monitor these pathways early enough, and if we can make enough biomarkers that directly look at this and then tweak them, then potentially I reckon, this is like vision for the future, like a long time probably down the track, but it'd be amazing if we could do that. But,
so what were the specific components of your program? What natural agents have you used in order to try to block the growth or the progression of the cancer stem cells?
Well, I've been using some from each of the pathways that triple negative breast cancer uses. So there's 10 different pathways that I've found, the main pathways according to the literature. And for instance, one is the hypoxic, the HIF alpha 1 hypoxic inducible factor pathway. And so I use garlic and soybean to suppress that one. Hedgehog pathway is another one. Garlic does that one as well. And sulforaphane, which is
broccoli,
the broccoli and those kind of
cruciferous.
Yes, they block the hedgehog pathway, but you can also buy a supplement. So my thing with creating my treatment array is I had to rely on these compounds that I could actually access online, and ones that I could access from reputable companies as well. And I went through the safety checks with the Therapeutic Goods Agency to make sure that they're regulated products as well. Looked into all the possible side effects and contraindications with any of the medications that I was on. And so the hedgehog pathway is another one, and then another one is methionine. So that's amino acid that's essential for every cell. And I found that if you in triple negative breast cancer, if you lower that, reduce that down, you can't actually. It's another one of those things where you can't completely block it, because then you'd get into, your body would probably get into all sorts of problems, because it's a fundamental amino acid. So but there is a standard amount that is safe to reduce it to. So that one I found very difficult because a lot of the foods I love are high in methionine, but I have managed to cut down my meat intake. So that's high in methionine. Small things like I don't cook in sesame oil anymore. That's really high in methionine. Small things like that. So that's more of a dietary one. Then there's there's the notch pathway. So quercetin and Withania somnifera, which is ashwagandha. I think that's how you pronounce that one.
Ashwagandha.
Yes. So they're ones that suppress the notch pathway in triple negative breast cancer. And there's danchin root, which is another one. And there's another one that I was taking too, which I wonder which may have had an effect before I was diagnosed. And this one is not in my publication, but glucosamine sulfate reduces the STAT3 pathway, and this was the only supplement that I was religiously taking before I was diagnosed, and I was using that because I run, and I found it useful for reducing knee pain from running. And I was using this for 6 months before I was diagnosed, and I actually had relatively low, well, it was sort of in mid-range mitotic rate for my tumour type, and this may have been influenced. It could have been influenced by the glucosamine that I was taking beforehand. It may have slowed it down.
Are some of these pathways more important than others?
Well, this is what we don't know. I had to base my information from what's already been studied. But I think what is important is suppressing these pathways at least to a minimal amount, all of them all at once. I think that is a synergistic way that is more important than hard hitting one at a time, which is what the thinking seems to be is you might use one thing and that's going to be the silver bullet. But the way these cancers can adapt seems to be very quick. So I'm thinking you only need to, what's more important is to at least use a small amount, or at least use suppress as many pathways as you can, because I think these cancers are probably like anything else in nature, where they use the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So they will go from one, and if there's a bit of a block there, a bit of suppression there, then they'll just go to the next one if that's easier. It's like a river, like downstream.
Yeah.
A river will just meander its way around the rocks, or come up against one, go to the next one.
So Mother Nature is a bit opportunistic, would you say, in the sense that evolution just wants the practical result and doesn't really care how it gets there. And you have these. I just have maybe it's because some of these were discovered first, and some, but it seems like hedgehog, notch, WNT, they seem to have gotten the lion's share of attention from the scientists. But I think the key thing is that science is reductionist in its, sort of basic nature, for the simple reason you want to know what a particular compound does to a particular, situation. So I think what's unique about your approach, and it could only I mean, it's most likely to have come from a person like yourself who's skilled in, in science, but not necessarily devoted to one particular topic. That you could see the bigger picture, and you were motivated, clearly, personally motivated to come up with a practical solution. Whereas of those, whatever I forget what the number I said, 17,000 or something, papers on cancer stem cells, um, almost all of, or certainly most of them, are concerned with one particular pathway. That's
Yes.
the topic for that particular scientist and
Mm,
or group of scientists, and they don't look at, well, what is the practical implication of this? If you block WNT, then the cancer is going to go down that notch
mm,
pathway, and vice versa, or they're going to
mm,
turn to one of the others. So I totally resonate
mm.
with your approach. I think I completely it gave me chills really to read your paper, because it's so
Oh,
similar to the way that I have been thinking about this aspect of cancer. And you don't find this point of view very often in the research literature. Occasionally you will find papers that, and there's a handful of them, that talk about natural products for cancer stem cells. My friend and colleague Dwight McKee in California, he and a German oncologist wrote a paper last year called "The Big Five" about resveratrol, genisteins, or isoflavone, sulforaphane, curcumin, and green tea as the sort of
mm-hmm.
key, the five best researched and probably most effective natural products for cancer stem cells. But you've taken it to a whole different level, because you've actually you've taken that tumor type, and now the next step
Well,
would be you could analyze
mm,
the individual, right? And you could say, well,
yes,
actually, the best
yes,
combination for this person would,
yes,
right,
personalized,
right.
yes.
What a prospect that is. That's a fantastic prospect.
Yes, I alluded to this in the publication. We put a one line um, sentence in
Hmm.
alluding to this prevention idea,
Hmm.
and that is, say you know that you've got the breast cancer genes,
Yeah.
for instance,
Hmm.
but you don't have breast cancer yet.
Hmm.
Then that's where it'd be wise to be able to. It'd be great to be able to monitor the pathways that the breast cancer um, uses, and then you could tweak that if you found that those pathways become a bit out of kilter. And I mean, I could see in the future that even a baby, when it's born, it could be genetically mapped for any potential cancers, and then adults. There was a study that's just came out a few days ago about how long it takes, the lag time for a mutation to occur, and then the disease to be
Hmm.
progressed. So there's a patient who was first diagnosed with a bone marrow cancer at the age of 63, and they were found to have the genetic mutation that gave rise to that disease at around 44 years.
Hmm.
Uh, so at the age of 19, another one diagnosed at 34, it arose at age 9. So
Hmm.
if we could be monitoring for these mutations as
Yep.
well, and then and you look at your family history, at the moment anyone can look at, well, some people can look at their family history of disease, and then that's when you would use whatever you can to monitor these pathways and then manipulate them before the cancer actually starts
Sure.
to grow and proliferate. And there's other complementary pathways. It's not just what I found too. It's not just diet. It's not just natural compounds. There's of course you could use synthetic pharmaceuticals, which might reduce the side effects long term. sometimes these natural compounds have their own side effects. So isolating the active agent would be great. And then there's also exercise. So, for instance, the p53 tumor suppressor gene, that's enhanced with exercise. And the androgen receptor, there's co-activators relating to the RAS family there of the oncogenes, and they're suppressed with exercise. And
Yes.
um,
But
immune
it's all
systems
pointing.
enhanced.
It's all
Yeah.
pointing towards lifestyle modification
Yes.
and a more natural diet, because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a long discussion, but certainly there's a reason why all indications are that cancer really only became a major problem in the mid 19th century, and in most countries. And we could argue this for for hours, but that's my belief that cancer enormously rose up as we refined our food and added sugar to the food, and as we became more sedentary and so forth. Many things happened, of course,
Yes.
but um, maybe this is maybe we have an external anti-cancer. Uh, you might want to call this our external immune system, which is our food supply that, in the natural form, already contains all these anti-cancer agents that block
Mm-hmm.
the cancer stem cells. And if we go back in sort of a paleo way, I mean that word is much misused, but if you think about going back to a diet that's more reliant on certain foods and vegetables and fruits and
Mm.
vegetables and so forth, that we would automatically reduce our reliance on on pharmaceuticals, because I think that
Mm.
when you compare the total picture of pharmaceuticals versus natural products, there's no comparison. I mean, the pharmaceuticals, most of them cannot be taken safely and successfully over the long term, whereas broccoli and tofu
Mm-hmm.
and you know
Yeah.
and these other things, grapes and so forth, can be definitely taken. And if you're just talking about prevention and blocking the cancer from expressing itself, then yeah, I think it's feasible. It's feasible to do that for large portions of the population.
Yes, and it's no surprise that the indigenous people and have ancient remedies that are using
Yeah,
natural compounds.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They found a jug. Archaeologists found a pot in India that was dated as 3,500 years old, and dried, of course. At the base of that pot were residues of basically of turmeric, of
Oh.
of cinnamon, of cloves, of ginger. In other words, it was a kind of a curry or kind of garam
Wow.
masala. These are
Mm-hmm.
very ancient things that in India, I understand. I mean, that it's just sort of a natural thing to reach for turmeric as a kind of a cure-all. and and then the other side of the other side of the coin is, you think about green tea and soy and the Chinese culture. It probably goes back thousands and thousands of years. Um, that's pretty amazing. And you think that
Yes.
of the big five, which I mentioned, you
Mm.
know, you have
Yes.
soy, in other words, the isoflavones, and then you have sulforaphane, broccoli, and you have curcumin,
Mm.
turmeric, uh, and you have green tea. It's like a Chinese Chinese or Indian
Yes.
meal. I mean, basically, that's what
Yes.
it is. It's just but we're playing
Mm.
catch up, right? Because now we have the cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and now, and by the way, before the adoption of um, Western ways of eating and of living, the cancer rate in China by all indications was extremely low. The very, very low rate of breast cancer in China before the adoption of Western ways. Now, of course,
Mm.
they're catching up in many ways, but bad ways as well as good ones. And I don't know about India. I imagine it's the same. Japan also extremely low rates of breast cancer in Japan, and green tea and soy, and these are the
Yeah.
traditional foods of these countries, and there's a reason for that. So I think,
Yes.
but you're giving a scientific rationale for
Mm.
uh, something that's been sort of part of human culture for a very, very long time.
Yes, and I think it was just getting down to the nitty gritty of how cancers operate.
Hmm.
And that is, they go from one pathway to the next, to the
Yes,
next, to the next. And
absolutely.
it seemed to me a no brainer. Well, you just suppress all of the pathways all at once.
Absolutely. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
It's
which I was shocked that it, it, it's not a design that's been used.
no.
Being new to cancer,
Uh-huh.
I was quite surprised, but I think it takes someone who isn't entrenched in a
Absolutely.
field to be able to come in from the outside and make those connections. I love making connections between things, and
Yes.
that's seeing the patterns, and that's probably how this has come about in my mind.
It's the
Yeah.
combination. Yes, it's the fresh view that you have. As I say, you have good, very good research skills, but you came to it. It's amazing that that this came to you while you were suffering from chemo brain, and yet you were able to
Oh,
fight your way through that. That's just so.
it probably helped
It
my chemo
it
brain.
helped the
It
chemo
probably,
brain. Yeah.
yeah, well, it probably did. They say use it
Yeah,
or lose it. So
better
it
than
it
better
probably,
than just doing
yeah.
crossword puzzles. I guess
Oh yeah,
inventing a cure
yeah,
for cancer might be a better alternative.
yeah.
Well, anyway, it's been a tremendous pleasure talking to you. I'm so happy that we've done this because when I read your paper, I thought I have to talk to this person, whether we had a podcast or
Yes,
not.
it's
So
been
thank
good.
you so much for being on our program.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I hope we'll talk to you again, and we look forward to your next paper and hearing more from you. So, for the Moss Report, this is Ralph Moss.
Thank you for listening to The Moss Report. Visit our website at themossreport.com and subscribe to hear more discussion of cancer treatment options, alternative research, and more. For more information about Dr. Moss and his work, including scheduling phone consultations, go to mossreports.com.